Hi, welcome to the Moral Injury Support Network podcast. Um, Today we have a great guest with us, Paula J. Kemp. She is a U.S. Navy combat veteran who served during Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom as a combat photographer. She is the founder and president of Unjustly Served Foundation and Unjustly Served LLC, a veteran-led advocacy initiative focused on accountability prevention and reform surrounding military sexual trauma. Paul is deeply proud of her service and the men and women who wear the uniform. Her work is grounded in the belief that true support for military includes holding systems accountable because integrity, trust, and leadership are essential to readiness and to those who serve. As an MST survivor and peer support specialist, Paul has spent years working directly with veterans navigating the long-term impact of trauma, including the VA claims process, discharge upgrades, and access to care. Her work is rooted in lived experience and a commitment to ensure that survivors are not only heard, but supported with real actionable pathways forward. Paul is the co-author of Unjustly Served, The Brutal Reality of Military Sexual Trauma, written alongside Marshall Kirkpatrick. Marshall is a U.S. Marine Corps veteran and licensed professional counselor specializing in sexual trauma, PTSD, and complex trauma. His clinical expertise brings critical insights into the patterns, behaviors, and long-term impacts of military sexual trauma, helping bridge the gap between survivor experience and professional understanding. Welcome to the show, Paula.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So you served in the Navy. Tell us, what years did you serve?
I joined the reserves actually in 1998, and then I exited after it was 2006.
Okay. And what were some of the duty stations that you were at during your
Well, as a reservist, it started off quite a bit different, and then back in '98, before 9/11, it was completely different, I
right?
believe, than what it is now. Um, but I was stationed in Southern California at Coronado Island, the air base down
Okay.
there,
Right.
and with combat camera unit. And then once 9/11 happened, I was gone a lot. So I'd get activated and sent to different things that needed to be covered.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about because I was in the Army Reserve before 9/11. I served on active duty from 1990 to 2000, then I got out. After 9/11, I came back into the Army Reserve, and I remember, having combat camera at various units, and you're right, after 9/11, they were deployed all the time. They really didn't need to be on active duty because they were on active duty orders anyway all the time,
Yeah,
deploying, and
right.
during your Navy experience, what are some of the key issues, or some of the, I would say, what are some key experiences you had during that time of service that changed you, or were very impactful as you think about them now?
Well, my first thoughts are always the good ones. Lots of fun. I mean, you wear a camera around your neck and you outrank everybody. So that was always a lot of fun. Getting to bump somebody out of the way, excuse me, sir, but I got to get this shot kind of a thing. So
Right.
I really enjoyed that. But I joined very late in life, very late. I mean, I was 34 when I joined, and it was my turn. It was my time. My children were all in school by then, and I had three kids, and so the reserve just worked perfectly for me to get to serve my country and do what I wanted to always do, but life had taken a different turn. So it was time, and I went and I joined the reserves. I didn't even know how to turn on a camera when I joined. It was a program that was
Oh,
called, I think it was called AIA or something like that, Accelerated Integration Accession, something like that. You know, the military and their acronyms.
yeah.
Um, so it was kind of an on-the-job training program, is basically how I looked at it. I sold real estate part-time. I was a PTA mom, a stay-at-home mom with three kids. My husband at the time was a fireman. So I just was able to volunteer a lot and cover different stories and exercises and things that were going on at the time. Um, I had an absolute blast. My unit was amazing. My brothers in my unit were very supportive of me and excited to teach me, but I was excited to learn. And so I accelerated and they just really supported me. I went back to school and took some photography and things like that to help make it so that I understood what they were, trying to teach me. And back then it was still film. It hadn't transitioned over into digital. It was shortly after that that it transferred to digital. And then I really started accelerating because I could understand it and see the results much faster than one weekend a month. By the time 9/11 hit, I was doing pretty well with learning and I mean they even had to teach me how to salute. I mean it's just comical. I don't think they have the program anymore. I went to boot camp in it wasn't right away. I think it took them 2 years before I finally went to boot camp.
Oh,
And it
wow.
was, yeah, and that's a funny story in itself as well, because in the reserves back then, they told me when they recruited me, it was like, well, you'll go to boot camp, but it's reserve boot camp, and
Yeah.
it's in New Orleans, and you can, they have maid service, if you stay in a
Wow.
hotel,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm like, all right, that's awesome, yeah, I'm all for it. So I planned on that. And then right before, I want to say it was about 2 weeks, maybe a month before I left, they decided to start some new program and drop you into week 6 at um, in Chicago, in Illinois at Great Lakes. So I thought I was going for Mardi Gras and I was going to have a good old time on the Navy's bill. And instead, I froze my butt off at in Chicago at Great Lakes and
Yeah.
had,
I bet.
had to fit in at week 6 of boot camp. It was pretty funny. They depended on your unit to bring you up to speed,
Yeah. Right.
and prepare you for that boot camp. And my guys, they thought they were real funny and I love them to death. We had so much fun, but they told me to prepare for it is never volunteer for anything and go watch Full Metal Jacket and you'll do fine.
Nice. Nice.
Oh gosh. So that was the kind of guys that I worked with. They were wonderful. Um, I got to travel the world. I got to see things that I never ever would have seen. I was raised pretty poor in Southern California, a little town called Pomona. It was very combined ethnicities. I was more the minority, but never really knew it. It wasn't anything. I think it prepared me to just fit into life anywhere I needed to go,
Mm.
which really migrated into my experience in the Navy. I just never had any fear of that kind of stuff. I was always a curious cat and would ask questions, why do you do that? What's that? Any day in the Navy was my favorite. Exercises and coverings to do different programs that were going on, and I loved it. Accelerated and started getting noticed, started getting requested for different training exercises that were going on. One of them was Fleet Week in San Francisco, and I did that a couple of years, and then I think it was 2003. I was one of the more experienced photographers, and because of my position, I was able to leave and volunteer and go before other people. So I ended up being one of the first ones to go down and scout the areas and try to prepare for the team that was coming in, the camera team that was coming in and stuff like that. So I started scouting around. I had a driver that knew the area and would drive me around to different places to try to get the shots, right? To post everybody for the big parade of ships and all that. And while I was out there, I saw the Golden Gate Bridge and I was at a museum or something. And I just mentioned to the curator there, of course I'm in uniform, and I said, gosh, it'd be really nice to get up there and take pictures from there, because you got the Blue Angels, you got
Yeah.
the
Right.
ships, and God, that would just be such a phenomenal shot. He said, let me make a phone call. And he did. And I was the first military person, photographer, definitely, but first military personnel, supposedly is what they told me. And the second female ever allowed up to the top of the Golden Gate Bridge, second to the Queen of England. Um,
Wow.
Yeah, so I've got great stories and several more like that where I just, because I was so curious and I think I just didn't have any, I didn't know better. You don't know what you don't know. And so
Right.
my training wasn't in a type of grooming of fear. Being 35, a mother of three, I came in, most people thought I was an officer, and here I was only an E2, E3, when I
Yeah.
joined or got out into the fleet and things like that. The longest I was on board ship was 2 weeks, and the rest of the time was being a ground pounder and working a lot with the Marine Corps and Joint Forces. Worked pretty much with
Right.
every branch. So I had a lot of fun. I experienced the bad stuff. I experienced the MST when I think it was that same trip. I don't know if it was that year or the year after. I think it was the year after. Pretty sure it was the year after that because I covered Fleet Week for 5 years. And I think it was the year after that that I experienced military sexual trauma. And I didn't tell anybody. I was there with another female from my unit. We weren't real close. And when it happened, I didn't tell anybody. So I didn't want anybody to know because I was so afraid. First of all, I was afraid that my brothers in my unit would get involved and then they'd get in trouble. Um, and or I think it was more and I was fearful that I wouldn't be allowed to do my job anymore without a babysitter, without having an escort, or I just wouldn't have the freedom to do the job that I loved so much.
Right.
So that was a big part of why I didn't tell anybody what happened. I just pressed it down and tried to forget about it and move on, charged on. And then I ended up, I want to say about 2 years, maybe it was about 2 years. My marriage started failing. Things were going on, but I didn't really, it was after 9/11 and just, life had changed and it had become more stressful and I was being, called up more often. And so then they sent me to the Middle East. And when I came home from there, now I wasn't in one place for very long ever. In my entire career, my whole 8 years of service, the longest I was gone was for training for schools, A school and C school, combat photography school, and things like that. Um, but when I was in the Middle East, I was there for 30 days, and it was very, very compacted with lots of go, go, go. Places that I'd have to go and cover and see and the pictures that I took, the stories that I heard, the aftermath, what I saw, just the entire experience was just very jam-packed with a lot of emotion.
Mhm.
Just a lot of stuff that I think that
Yeah.
training doesn't prepare you for that, right? I've done a lot of trainings for combat, a lot of Camp Pendleton trainings. They sent us
Right.
to the jihadi school where we had to, practice snipers and just all that crazy, crazy town stuff that we went through there. That was a lot of fun, but it was very serious as well. So anyway, when I came back, I started having some anger issues. And I also got injured while I was there in the Middle East in Kuwait. I got bit.
Let me stop you real quick there for a
Sure,
second. I
absolutely.
want to get back on a couple of things. Um, so you'd been in 5 years, more or less before the MST, right?
Hmm.
Okay. And what rank were you at this when the MST happened? Do you remember?
I was at E4, I believe.
Okay. And this was while you were deployed,
That was on a
or
training. No, that was on a training. That was
oh,
for
okay, it was on a
completely.
training thing. So where does the MST fit in terms of, so you were just talking about deployment. Where does the MST fit in terms of that? Was it before or after? How?
It was before. Well, I had already been deployed elsewhere,
Yeah, okay.
but it was before I went to the Middle East.
Okay. So you were stateside. It was a training exercise. Um, and the MST happened, but you never reported it, right?
Correct.
Okay. You were worried about it. Was the perpetrator um, same rank, lower
No,
rank, so
no,
superior?
he was a first class. I was a third class,
Okay, so
and he was
he's
first
a
class.
couple
So
ranks above you.
yeah, yeah. So the way that that happened, it was very clever. Uh, at Fleet Week, the city and the businesses will host a ship or host, we had a host for our ship. And I'm
Yeah.
not going to say what ship I was on, but I was on one of the bigger ships.
Okay.
Um, and so it was a brewery up there that hosted us. So then at that party, when you come in and it's like the night before the actual parade of ships, I believe, they host a party for you, and so we all went. And I got invited, to be part of ship's company and go. And I was going to be covering it, taking pictures and what have you. And so um, no, I don't think I was taking pictures of that. I got invited to go and participate. So I was like, I was ship's company. Um,
Mm,
so I went and I was fed and they had beer and and so we're just all
right.
enjoying the hosting and the party and all of that, the fun part of it. And so I was working the next morning and I had to get up early in order to prepare. And so I needed to leave early, but it was already dark out and I didn't know, where I was going. I was kind of like, I was asking the people that I was with, that I'd gone there with. I said, okay, how do I get back? Do I go this way, that way? Because it was in the financial district. And so it was a bit of a hike, it was maybe a
Yeah.
couple miles. And so one of them offered to walk me back. And I thought that was great. I was going to have to be alone. And so, we took off and it was the financial district. It was very isolated, very desolate. It's closed down. Nobody was really around. And yeah, so that's where that happened. And I didn't know his name. I couldn't remember his name. Wouldn't have mattered because I wouldn't have told anybody anyway.
Right.
And he told me that, if you tell anybody, they won't believe you because you're just a reservist. I'm ship's company.
Mm,
I outrank you, all
right.
that mental BS that
Right.
so I didn't tell anybody, but later, so the next day, actually, I sucked it up and I did my job. I did what I had to do, but I had met a couple of chiefs. And because I was older, people assumed that I was an officer. So they for some reason, didn't look at my rank. I don't know. Anyway, um, I had met some chiefs, and so they invited me to go the next day out with them. They were going to go to the comedy club and things like that. Well, I was scared. Even though at the time I might not have admitted it, but I was I was just kind of scared and so they invited the whole unit to go there. I think they were part of the ship's photography department. And I thought everybody was going, and it ended up being just myself and these two chiefs. Well, they were fabulous. They were super supportive, super nice, completely professional. And
Mm,
it ended up just being the three of us at this comedy club. Well, the girl that I was with, that had gone with me, she found out the next day. And so she tried to make a big deal out of that I was, what do you call it, where you're, I can't think of the word, um,
y-
frat,
y-
or they were fraternizing. I don't know which
yeah.
way it would go because,
Yeah. Right.
I was only an E4 at the time. So,
Right.
um, so she tried to cause problems for that. And that just caused me to shut down all the more, so I became so paranoid of doing the wrong thing, even though all of my intentions were harmless. I mean, I
Yeah. Yeah.
being one of the
Yeah.
crew, one of the buddies, let's all hang out and have fun. Um, so that was kind of detrimental. Years later, I ran into her again and I hated her. And there was some transference there, and I treated her like crap from that moment on because I felt like she was just trying to cause more injury instead of asking me what was going on with me because she even said I definitely my personality changed. Um, you know, she just didn't understand. And so years later, when I finally told her what happened, and this was after I had started my first nonprofit, and I contacted her. It was Facebook came up, and I contacted her. I said, you didn't know this, but I had been raped the day before all of that went down, and she felt so bad, and and just for the whole way in which she experienced me and I experienced her, it was nice to have that ability to come together and have grace for each other, you know?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that was
Yeah.
kind of cool. But that was the only person that could have known, you know, what had happened at the time
Right.
because she was there and saw kind of a switch in me. But other than that, I think I hit it pretty well until I wrote the book. I know I'm kind of jumping around, but once we wrote the book, then some of the guys that I still keep in touch with from my unit, they reached out to me and said, "What the heck? Why didn't you tell us?" You
Yeah.
know, that kind of a thing. You know, and that
Yeah.
was nice too to be kind of validated with their reaction too, but grateful that it was much later because it didn't impact my career at the time.
Well, I think the story illustrates well, um, sort of I mean, sort of the difficulties of being, um, not just a woman in the military, although it certainly happens on a greater scale and more often than women, but just being part of an elite group or unit and that has esprit de corps, unity, these kind of concepts built into it, right? And
Mhm.
then being an outlier and the difficulties of if I tell, I might harm my buddies, my team, who knows what's,
Right.
all this, and um as well as your perpetrator made a good point. I mean, it could be very possible, even likely, maybe that you weren't listened to because you were a reservist. But it creates like within the military, whom I served in the military for a very long time. A lot of people have. It's still this. There's like um you can be easily disempowered based on rank, gender, the situation, so on and so forth. And you're part of this unit, this group, but you have this experience that's very much against the group norms and so on. But it can be very difficult to say something because of all these other factors that come into play. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so MST, whether it happens to a man or a woman, is those are common factors for men. Um, there are similar sort of things of like, what kind of man am I that I let this happen? What will people think of me? Will anything happen? Well, so it's despite within the military, we have all these structures and systems about reporting and whatever. Um, it's good to have a system, but the issues are cultural more than anything. When you think about um, ideas of being a disharmonious person in the group, the person that this happened to, and potentially upsetting that, and will you get the justice you deserve, and so on and so forth. That just having a system is not enough. You need cultural awareness, cultural change. I think in our current administration, I have some real criticisms of um, their approach to these sort of issues. And so, unfortunately, when you talk about military and changing culture, in my experience, right, it's always the eye rolls of like, oh, here we go, and stuff like that. But it really does need to change. Your story is unfortunately one of many, many, many stories
Yes.
within this. So, Um, you mentioned the book. I'd like to shift to that a little bit. Or actually, let's look at the first nonprofit you started. What prompted that? What was your goals and objectives? What were you trying to accomplish with that first nonprofit?
Sure. Well, when I got out, like I started to say, was I thought it was I thought it was PTSD, but I didn't know. I just had a lot of anger and a lot of stuff that I witnessed in Kuwait uh, was true. Well, I found out later, once I started learning in therapy what all that was. It was triggering a lot of the MST and things like that. So anyway, so I went to file because I got injured while I was there. I was bit by something and it caused a systemic issue within my foot and my circulation and all that kind of stuff. So I went to the VA to start getting some help with that. And um, I ended up having to file a claim. So the person I sat down with, who was my advocate, he was an Army Ranger in Vietnam, and he had been helping veterans for years and years. And so we started my claim, and I was just sharing with him, a lot of my feelings and
Yeah,
things through, still not talking about the MST. And he just came out and he asked me, he said, did you experience MST? And he says, can I ask you something? He goes, you don't have to answer, but, and I'm like, well, what is that? I'd never heard it before. And so he said, military sexual trauma. And I just started crying. And I was like, how did you know? I've never told anybody.
right.
And so anyway, so he helped me file and launch that. He got me into some therapy through the vet center. And then eventually I got into the VA healthcare system and started getting therapies and things like that. As I started progressing and getting better, he asked me if I would sit in with him because he was starting to have, so this was around 2010, 2011, around there. He started having more women be referred to him, and he could feel that they were a little uncomfortable sitting with him. So he asked if I would sit in with him and kind of be their battle buddy so that they would feel more comfortable
Yeah,
having another
right.
female. So that's what launched it. That's what started me becoming an advocate. And then eventually it kind of grew. And he said, why don't you, let's get you to start a nonprofit. So I created a nonprofit called Veteran Sisters, and it's in Southern California. And it was basically just going with female veterans, helping them navigate the claim system, not being a VSO or anything like that, but helping them how to gather their evidence, how to gather their
Yeah,
paperwork and all that kind of
right,
stuff. I ended up being a battle buddy, going with them to their comp and pens, going with them to the VA to get them into the healthcare system. The VA is a very uncomfortable place for sexual trauma survivors.
right,
It's very male dominated and it's military, right? So it could be very
right,
triggering. It's very hard for women to go, especially by themselves. So I
right.
just kind of became their service dog and then advocated for them when they were going through and meeting with their doctors and the questions to ask and things like that. It grew and it just blossomed into becoming a full-on battle buddy program, incorporated a lot of the women that I had been helping. They wanted to do something more once they got to that point. And so I kind of developed a staff and a team and it just grew and grew. So that was the first nonprofit. And I did that for about 7 years. It
Okay, so in that, you, I mean, I can imagine how, uh, for many women, because of your help and assistance, I would think they probably got higher ratings and got a lot more care. They probably without you, without your program, how many women? Well, you may not have the answer to that. I'm sure there are countless women who would not be getting care at all, might not be getting disability payments at all, right?
well, I humbly say that I hope that they would have gone on and found a way to find it. It's not necessarily what I was doing, but yes, I think that it helped that I had such a great advocate, and so I could see the benefit in that, and that just became my calling. I think that it did benefit a lot. Definitely benefited me as well. It was great therapy for me too to give back and um, help, my sisters. But the really interesting thing, and now I kind of laugh about it, not that it's a funny subject, but on my own naive, my own assumptions that it didn't happen to men. I had no idea that men suffered MST. I never thought about
Right.
it. Wasn't my experience, right? So
Right.
I started having men coming to me, being referred to me too, to help them with their personal statements, and navigate through, all the paperwork and all that stuff that they had to gather for their VSO. And then sometimes even just to go to the VSO. It's just such a hard thing to overcome.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so I battle buddy up and I help the men too. Um, and then I became an MST advocate. So my specialty became helping them write their personal statement of their MST trauma. And once that was so empowering because once that's done and you've got it on paper, it then becomes the document that you can hand when you go to your comp and pen or you can hand when you go to
Right.
your medical appointment. And you don't have to re-traumatize yourself to go through it and
Right.
re-say it all, right? And I can remember when I was going to my comp and pens, you'd have to tell it every time, and
Right.
I fought for 5 years before I ever got any service connection. And so I'd appeal and appeal and appeal, and I have to go back and redo it and redo it. So found that the benefit of being able to hand it to the doctor and say, here, read this, and then ask me questions. Because before that, after the interview, I'd be in my car just crying and beating myself up because I forgot to say this. I should have said that. And so it kind of became a staple item of the claims process that became very important. And I really advocated for that a well-written personal statement that is not a police report. It is not dry and just factual. It is
Right.
emotional. It is impactful. And it may even have a few cuss words in it because that is your raw, true feeling of your experience. And then it gives that rater the ability to really feel and see what you went through so that they can hopefully feel your injury, not just read about it, or not just, it's not just a
Right.
police report. So that became it's still, I'm very passionate about that, the importance of your personal statement being written in a way that is impactful. And it becomes a tool to where you never have to go through that again. You just hand it off and have them read it.
Yeah, I think it's I can definitely see the value in that. Do you feel like um institutionally, structurally, things have changed for the better for veterans in terms of those kind of claims, or is it still very much an uphill battle for um people trying to make MST part of their claims process?
Well, in my experience, I think that it has become, I don't want to say easier. I want to say that there have been more. So when I filed, there wasn't an MST designator. It was PTSD or major depression. And
Yeah.
even back then, PTSD was only for combat veterans. Well, I kind of fell into that because I was a combat photographer. So I was in a combat MOS, but
Right.
I never saw live combat. Did I go to combat, areas and saw some things, but it wasn't, I just didn't feel that that was combat. So anyway, MST became the designator after I got 50% for major depression back then. And that was in 2014, 2015, somewhere around in there is when I finally got my service connection for 50%.
Yeah.
Um, so since then, I'm an advocate. So even for myself, I am expecting of certain services. I am expecting of certain um, uh, treatment, right? So when I was in Southern California, and especially when I was helping other veterans, I become a pit bull on a pork chop, and I'm very protective, and I'm going to make sure that my veterans are taken care of well. So in the beginning, before I, learned to be a smooth operator, I was rather abrasive and
Yeah.
combative, and so they'd be like, "Oh God, here comes Paula," when I go with my veterans to the VA, and so I had to learn to iron that out and be a little bit more gentle and not and you know use the system to benefit the veteran and not
Right.
to go in and try to get them to change everything. So I
Right.
think that yes, things have changed. They have gotten for the better. Are they where they should be? No. Are they where common sense says it should be? No. Is it where the civilians are at? No. Um, but it's better than it was. So, that's kind of like a compared to what answer.
Yeah, right, right.
So is it getting better? Yes, but there is lots of room for improvement. And a lot of us are not crybabies. We're not just whining and complaining. We're saying, here's what happened, and here's what we could do to fix it. Here's what we can do to make it better. I appreciate all of the MST reporting agencies now that they have for sexual assault, the SARCs and the SARTs and whatever, all the different branches call it. That's a step in the right direction, but it still has a long ways to go to get to even what is on the civilian side.
Yeah, and I think part of the issue again, it's a cultural issue. And as I've talked to I remember talking to leaders about moral injury. We were talking to I forget exact, but she was sort of like she helped people get funding and help get grant funding and so on. And we were talking to her about moral injury. It wasn't me as much as a colleague, and she relayed this story to me because she was very frustrated, and I got frustrated afterwards. She told me the story, but the short of it was, and she hadn't served, she wasn't a veteran, but she helped people get funding, veteran organizations. And after my colleague was talking about moral injury, her attitude was, I think you should probably focus on heroes more because that gets funding. This like women, with their feelings hurt and stuff. And people aren't going to respond to that. And I was so freaking angry
Yeah,
uh that she might not have been wrong. Right? She might have been telling the truth that people want to give money about heroes. And I'm like, I'm tired of hearing about the Rangers and the Green Berets and the Delta and the SEALs, how heroes they are and all this. Fine, fine, they did some stuff, right? But there are millions of people who served in the military who got harmed by their comrades and even just those kind of heroes
right,
um, that aren't getting the compensation, aren't getting the funding they deserve. Work like we do focused on moral injury doesn't get the funding it deserves. And to be honest, some of those heroes, when it comes to how they treat their fellow service member, are some of the worst people I've ever experienced. Like I have a friend who was a elite warrior, and he's a great guy. But I also know others in that community that are horrible human beings when it comes to the way they treat people that are not like them.
right,
And I know a story of a woman, she told me about how she got thrown down the stairs by a special operator who was working on staff because he was hurt, so he couldn't be out with the door kickers and all his buddies. And he was this guy walking around, angry all the time and feeling ashamed because he wasn't out kicking doors. And all she said was, like her job was to report on certain things she did and got thrown down the stairs because of it. And there was nobody to report it to because everybody else in the op cell was guys like him, right?
right,
So the real story is that some of these guys are real pieces of you know what.
right,
So it's like they're heroes in some ways, but in other ways, and it's not all operators or anything like that. All I'm saying is like there's a whole story, a whole bunch of stories that are not being told. And so, MST is a similar thing in that there's so much like that people are unwilling to talk about or just telling your story is difficult in that will people believe me? Will they care? How will they look at me? All this kind of stuff. And the system wants to deny its existence in some ways because if everybody that was experienced MST was being due compensated, appropriately compensated, it would break the system. To which my answer is, well, don't allow that stuff to happen and we can solve this. Like,
Right. Absolutely.
but again, like I'm a little on my soapbox, but I do get passionate about this stuff too. And it's like it's again one of those issues that depending on the administration gets attention or not, you know?
Well, that,
Um,
I don't like to jump into politics or anything, but every administration has been an issue, in my opinion.
oh, okay, yeah.
It,
All right.
it it's not so much the administration. Yes, the administration, in my opinion, the
Yeah,
administration
that's important.
is who gets to make, the changes and implement them, and they're trying. But really, I think it comes down, it's a moral injury. It also comes down to morals of leadership.
Mm,
So, there's bad actors in anything and everything in life, right? That's
right.
unfortunately a part of
Yeah.
humans. I was trying to say Homo sapiens and
Yeah.
humans together.
I like it.
But there's bad actors in everything, and really, in my opinion, it comes down to leadership. So the leadership back then, maybe when you had these heroes uh, that fall into that category, and the ones that were misbehaving, and acting unbecoming were allowed to get away with it, right? Because they still did a job that was required of them. So that kind of washed away
Right.
his behavior. And so that is a big part of the problem is that I know I raised two boys and a girl. And when I heard that some general or some admiral, somebody said, well, what do you expect? We're sending our boys off to kill and fight combat. Well, what do you expect when they come home, and they're treating their wives and girlfriends and stuff so poorly? Well, we train them to be killers, and it's like, well, we also can train them to be good, responsible
You can
loving
absolutely do both.
fathers,
Yeah.
and so it's a perception of, is that acceptable or not?
Right.
I, you think about how boys are raised and how girls are raised. Girls are raised to be cleaner and pristine, a little more. And of course, there's guys that are like that too. And then there's girls that are like to be tomboys and what have you. And maybe they don't care if their nails are done or not. But our perception is that boys get away with it because that's a boy. They're just being a boy.
Right.
Girls are just being. So I think that a lot of that has to do with this, is expectation and acceptable behaviors. So I think that the expectations and accountability is really where we need to focus on, is that the people who have those, um, let them get away with certain behaviors because of that, they need to be held accountable as well. So it really does fall onto leadership. And many times, even as an E4, I was in leadership. So I don't
Mm,
think it really has a lot to do with rank, because you can be an E1 at boot camp and you're in leadership, right?
right.
So I think it comes down to training, exposure, accountability, and expectation becoming. And so I think we've just lost a lot of that. And it just seems to have gotten worse with reported incidences and unreported incidences, because it's accepted. And that's a big part of the problem. Um,
Right.
we can't fight fear. We can create maybe an environment where fear doesn't get to dictate the outcome, or how you report or not report. But yeah, so that's kind of my thought with the whole, it comes down to leadership. It's not just administration, as in government
Right.
administration.
Right.
It is command administration. It is much more. They really are the ones who are in control of the reporting system, which is not
Right.
exist in the military. So it's by command. So it
Right.
really comes down to that accountability.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I'm proud of my service in the military. I'm sure you are. Most people are. We're not saying the military is the problem. We're saying people in the military, leaders who choose because you really are choosing to ignore certain aspects with this under the false narrative that we need these people too much. We can't, we can't. And there's actually some good war movies that kind of talk about the stress of command, or the challenges commanders are trying to um, balance.
Sure.
And not really about MST, but I was just watching Platoon the other day again. I've seen the movie a million times. But if you've ever saw the movie, they did some bad things in a village late in the movie, and it was sort of like that they shouldn't have done. And the one character was, I'm going to report this, right? And it kind of came up in front of the battalion commander, and he's like, we don't have time to deal with this right now. And so if I've heard it, there absolutely will be a court martial. In the meanwhile, you need to get to your hole. You need to get to your, because combat was fixing to happen. And so commanders get into that mindset. And there are times when it's like, well, we can't deal with this now. Actually, you can absolutely deal with this now, and you should. But it's
Right.
very easy to be like, no, we got all these other pressing priorities. There are always going to be pressing priorities. And
Right.
but you have people in your formation that are committing federal crimes.
Right.
And
Right.
but it's in the military, as you mentioned, it's very easy for that commander to decide not to take action and get away with it, because just getting someone to report is a uphill battle for very all for many reasons.
Sure.
So I appreciate that. I want to get into the work you're doing now and the book. What is the book about? What are you hoping to accomplish with that? What is Unjustly Served? Um, that nonprofit. What are you all focused on?
Well, in 2021, I was in California still, and my son passed away. He was in a car accident. And so I stepped down from the nonprofit Veteran Sisters at that time, and was just dealing with a bunch of grief, of course. And then we moved out here to Tennessee, and I kind of floundered around, set myself up, got myself into the programs out here for my own mental health because I knew, you know, based on my past of, I know I needed support and people to talk to and all of that therapies. And so I was doing a little bit better, and then my friend Ricky, who's a police officer, retired police officer, he's also a chaplain in Texas for the police department, and he was helping me with the grieving and all of that kind of stuff. So anyway, he said, "Paula, it's time for you to get back in the saddle. You've got to get back up on that horse. Your veterans need you." And I was just like, God, I just don't want to do a nonprofit again. It's a lot of work.
Yeah,
And like you said, it's such an uncomfortable conversation for most people that it's hard to get funding, it's hard to get support, it's hard, to get sponsors. It's not something that, Pepsi or Coke is going to say, "Oh, we
yeah,
support,"
yeah, yeah. Right, right.
which is tragic. It really, I think that they could turn it into a celebration of survivors. I think it's just as much,
Yeah,
celebratory as any other hero. So I kind of balked at it, and I was like, I'm just not ready. And I came up with every kind of excuse I could. Well, he then turned it around. He said, "Okay, well then, you know what? Why don't you write a book?" And I was just like, "Me? Write a book? I barely got out of high school. Are you kidding
yeah,
me?"
right.
Um, and so we kind of laughed about it, and Stephanie says, "No, seriously." And the next morning I woke up and God must have just thumped me upside the head and said, "Here's the name of the book, and here's what you're going to do." And the title, it was Unjustly Served, and it was going to be a book that we brought stories that I had helped survivors write for the past,
Yeah,
7, 8 years. And so I reached out to them that day and I said, "Hey," to a few of them, I said, "This is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you guys think?" And there's 15 of us. That is the front of the book. We all tell our stories And then I was helping another veteran at the time. I also helped veterans with their entire claim, not just MST. So, whatever I would help them gather their evidence and things like that, how to navigate all that. And so I was helping another Marine Corps veteran. I think it was with asthma. It's always what comes to mind. There were a few other things, but and he was a Marine Corps veteran, and he just so happened to be a military sexual trauma, not military, sexual trauma therapist. He's a licensed clinical therapist who specializes in sexual trauma. And when I was putting these stories together, it was different than when I was helping them with their claim. When I was helping with their claim, it was one-on-one. It was just focused on their claim and going through and gathering all of the,
Yeah. Right.
all of the evidence. And so you look at it a little differently. So now with the book, they had to it had to be more of a story. You had to add more to it. You had to explain stuff
Right.
a little more. But I started seeing patterns and I started remembering, gosh, I remember this veteran, that veteran, bipolar, personality disorder, you know, adjustment disorder, all these disorders that they were being designated with before they got out and then after they got out. And then the VA was trying to, put these titles on them as well. And so I was asking him, I'm like, I'm just noticing that. And he said, and one of them in particular was bipolar. And I remember when I was going through the claims process, they sent me off to somebody to go be tested to see if I was bipolar because I was very, very angry.
Yeah.
And of course, I failed, but I kind of wanted that title because I thought that that would be the magic title that would fix me, right? If I had understanding of
Yeah.
what it was. But he said, no, it doesn't work that way. You cannot be diagnosed bipolar just from an instant,
Yeah.
and he went into kind of some detail and I was like, holy smoke. So he said, Paula, let me help you write the back of the book. Let me add to the book and we will connect the dots. And it ended up just becoming this book of knowledge that is insane. It was such a blessing and a curse to have to go through and edit it
Yeah.
portion. The first portion I didn't have a problem with. I do that all the time. But the second half, which was so clinical, and I didn't understand a lot of it, and I used big words, and I'm like, okay, we need to dummy this down. This needs to be military grunt, understanding. And so I wanted it to be for survivors to not feel alone, for survivors to have their voices heard, for survivors to have connection and to see and celebrate being a survivor. And so when he went in and did it, it became more clinical. But then when we were able to kind of, soften it and make it so that veterans will read it and respond to it and be able to absorb it instead of it just being a clinical diagnosis or a clinical explanation of things. So he did a fantastic job. And it's the first of its kind because it is the actual survivor telling their story. It's not a clinician talking about their patient. So you see the real-time raw story, and then he comes in and he'll pull different parts of their story and give explanation as to
Right.
the different reactions, the body responses, life after survival, after the trauma, because you change. And it's just an incredible book. And so once we put that together and got it published, which was hard to find a publisher because once again, the content, of it being so uncomfortable, um, it opened doors like crazy. So people were starting to come forward and sharing their stories, which is exactly what we wanted. And but also it started exposing a lot of things that we needed to advocate for. So, and ways of implementing a tracking system, a reporting system, helping grow and work on trauma triggers, trauma-informed care,
Right.
and education, So I ended up starting another nonprofit um, to help navigate all of that was coming out of the book exposure.
Okay. We're running down to just a few minutes left here. Who is meant to read the book?
In the beginning, survivors and family members. So it was so that the family members could read it and have understanding of what the survivor went through.
Mm.
But it was mostly to give voice. And, I also hoped that it would make millions of dollars and I'd be able to give it back to everybody that participated in the book to
Right.
have them make money on their story instead of other entities coming in and trying to make money off of our stories,
Yeah.
um, which is a whole nother story, that I had to help protect people from losing their voice. But um, yeah, so it ended up being that it's for everybody. It's for educators, it's for clinicians, doctors, anybody and everybody that has anything to do with any kind of sexual trauma and PTSD, because of course they're similar, not the same, and treatment is different, as you know.
Right.
But it just goes into great detail of understanding. So it's for anybody and everybody.
Yeah. Okay. Um, the the one of the things you mentioned I found true with moral injury too is when you were talking about bipolar, the idea of giving something a name, and I think that people have found that with moral injury too. Like they didn't know what's going on. They knew PTSD wasn't quite it. PTSD is primarily a fear-based phenomenon, but when you explain to them what moral injury is, and they're able to say, "Oh, I have a name for it now," and
Right,
it's a normal reaction, a normal injury, if you will, to a abnormal thing. It should have not should that should have never happened, right? And so, if you have moral injury or you've been morally injured, however you want to say that, it's like that's normal. It means you have a moral compass. It means you have
right,
an expectation of right and wrongness that was violated. Uh,
right,
and so it's, and so that's helpful to people um, in my counseling is just to be able to ask them, are you familiar with the term moral injury? No. And, well, here's in a nutshell what it is. Does that something you relate to? Does that make sense to you? Is that something? And they're like, wow, yeah, um that's a great explanation for what I'm feeling. Um it's helpful to name it. It's cathartic for people to be able to tell their story. And we did a similar book where we interviewed the spouses of service members with PTSD, and we put those stories in a book that we now share with clinicians. Anybody who registers for one of our continuing ed events, we share that. We send them a free copy of the book or see it insiders. And it just, like you mentioned, it's in story form, and then we include some things, um, some takeaways about what led to their moral injury, what were some of the obstacles they encounter. So you're not just hearing this story, but you're also like we're sort of teasing out some details for folks that are either involved in care or who are running nonprofits or organizations meant to help military families. Here are some issues that you if you didn't catch in the story, here's what was talked about. So I see that approach as being very valuable for people that aren't clinicians, that aren't gonna that don't necessarily always want to read something that's filled with data and
right,
analysis and all that, but just helps like open up the human side of things.
right.
Uh, and you
I
know,
didn't know what moral injury was until Marshall wrote the back. He mentions moral injury and we talk about that in the back of the book as well. I didn't know what that was until he educated me when I had to read the back of the book.
yeah,
And it's very important. And we talk about that a lot now too.
yeah. So, where can people get the book? How can they get in touch with you?
Well, we've got a website. It's called unjustlyserved.org.
Mhm.
And because we are now a nonprofit, and so they can go there and order the book. They can go there and find out about the programs that we have and how we still help through access. We still battle buddy up and help them navigate. And then Marshall, he has a training program. So if they want to find out more about the information of how we go out and we help with education, education and training for organizations, companies, workplace.
Right.
Be awesome to get into the DoD and the military and help educate them too, and just help everybody grow and become bigger and better. And we're stronger together, and the more we help each other, the better. And we are very much pro military, super proud of service, and just want to celebrate that we are survivors, and that is something to celebrate.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's I think people sometimes get it wrong that when we're being critical of the military, it's because we hate it or we're attacking it. No, we love the military. We want it to do better.
Right,
If you don't care about something, you just go, well, it's whatever. But
right.
when you know it can be better, it can do better. You want it to be better for the people that serve for itself. Um, you're critical. That's how that's how you work for change. And the military is one of those that um it has very strong borders, if you will, right, that are highly guarded. So it's hard to enact change sometimes because of the nature of it. But yeah, you know,
Yeah, but
it's
we're used to hard. So
that's
that's,
right.
so that's okay. That's okay. We're going to get back to
Yeah.
being, honor, courage, and commitment with integrity and accountability. And I don't think it's that hard. I think we've been lazy or just emotionally disconnected. We wouldn't allow our children to be that way. So why are we allowing our military to be that way? So I
Yeah.
think it's coming around, and I think now's the time, and I think it's going to happen. At least I'm going to keep trying.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think the more awareness there is about these kind of issues, the more leaders can recognize, like, yeah, I went through that too, but there was no voice for me. I remember talking to a one-star general when I was still in the tail end of my career. And he came and spoke to us chaplains. Um, and he shared some personal side of his own struggles, um, his own financial struggles, his own struggles with health, his own struggles with self-esteem, and these kind of things you don't hear from flag officers, and other senior officers. So after he did his talk, I went down and I hunted him down and I asked him. I said, I suspect, tell me if I'm right or wrong. I suspect there are a lot of other senior leaders like yourself who are having issues, but there's nobody they can tell. And they have to put on this face that everything is fine and good. And there's probably a lot of shame and guilt associated with that. And he said, you're 100% right. You're exactly right
But
on all counts. So I think as leaders, themselves leave the military or they get in the twilight and they're able to sort of be retrospective, and we have these names that they can use, like moral injury, moral distress, MST, whatever. We have these titles, these words that they can relate to, they can give a name for things. Hopefully they'll be willing to give back and say, hey, you know what, I still have senior leaders that serving. I'm retired, but we're still friends. Maybe I can have a conversation with them, and that can begin to trickle down, those people in authority. Because it doesn't matter what the president thinks, whoever they are, it doesn't keep you as a senior leader from engaging issues on your level, even if secretaries of whoever and presidents of whoever, it's not important to them. It doesn't mean it can't be important to you, right?
right,
So every leader at every level
right.
has some level of control they can exert in their own formation, whether you're a team leader, squad leader, battalion commander, ship, fleet command, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Rear admiral,
Integrity
you
and
have
pride.
something you can
Yeah,
say and do.
yeah,
So,
absolutely. Lead by example, right?
yep,
We were all taught that. So
yep, that's right.
absolutely.
Well, Paul, it's great talking to you, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your story. I applaud the work you're doing and
Thank
wish you great success. I hope the book does make millions of dollars that you can share with with people. And
They deserve
so,
it.
absolutely. Um, Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Let's see.